Now that we've covered some of the tools used in order to create appealing characters, let's look at two examples. One has decent appeal, and the other one has absolutely god-awful appeal. So I sculpted originally this figure, and I was really trying to think about making it appealing, making the shapes tapered, curve to curve, making just everything feel as one cohesive unit. And then I took it in and I broke everything deliberately. I kind of went in and just removed everything which was appealing about it. So let's look at these two sculpts. Let's look at this guy. And then let's look at this guy. If you want to know how to do that, you just hit Shift S in ZBrush. So looking at the one on the left, it just looks more appealing than the one on the right. It's fundamentally the same character. You know, it has all the same muscle groups and, you know, anatomically it's mostly the same in that regard. But it just looks a lot worse. And why is that? Let's look at it from a different angle as well. Let's look from this angle. It's more prominent here. So why does it look so much worse? It might take a second for you to just to spot that it actually does look worse. When you start to look at it, just start to compare the arm here, this area to this area, compare this region to this region. Just take a look at it. Just have a second and just take a look at it and compare the two. So what I've done is that I have gone in and I have just really messed up everything. So one of the main things we're looking at now, if we were to check out the chest area, this is a perfect example of what I was talking about before, where you want it to feel as every piece is a part of a melody. It's a part of a harmony. But here, it's like you have a melody and suddenly you have a very loud and out of tune guitar playing. So let's compare the two. Here you can see that all the parts, they're flowing nicely into each other. They have a curve to them and there is overlap, and they're not too strong, they're not too weak. They're just flowing nicely into each other. Well, here there is no appeal whatsoever. The shapes are flat and they're too strong. Let's look at the shoulders as well. It's very prominent there as well. In this case, you can see the shoulder is, or the deltoid muscles, it's really one big shape, which is just broken up. You have unity with variation. You have one big shape, like this. And it's one cohesive shape, which you can see from all angles. And it blends nicely into the surrounding areas. Let's look at the bad one. Does this blend nicely in? No, here you have three distinct units. One here, kind of. Then you have one here, and they're not really blending in, even though anatomically it's very similar. But you can really see it doesn't really fit at all. Same with this as well. Look at the pec, how nasty it is, and look at this one, where it just blends in. So it doesn't feel like a cohesive unit. Now, obviously, I've broken the living crap out of everything, but this is really one of the things I want you to notice when you're comparing these two. Notice the abs as well. Compare this version to this version. It can be hard to actually intellectually see what's going on, but again, notice here that I haven't necessarily described every shape. It's more like indicated and hinted at. So here there are little hints that they're flowing into each other, but they are very much flowing into each other. You see just how they're blending in and all that. And now let's look at the bad one. And here you see, here is one shape, and here is one shape, and here is one shape. And I also describe every single part of the abs as one cohesive piece as well, which means they're not blending in at all. Then let's look at the arms as well, particularly the forearm. Now, this is what I was talking about when it comes to tapering. Let's just hide the rest. You want this to taper. This is almost the same thickness here at the wrist as it is by the elbow. Same here from the side view. Can look kind of cool in certain designs, but in general, you want to at least have some curvature to it. So, perfectly the same distance here. We can measure this. We can drag this out like so, and then we can drag it down, and it's almost the same. It's a bit narrower, but it's not a crazy big difference. I've also made all the shapes not really flow into each other. This is what happens when you don't have curve to curve. So let's look at this. Here you can see there is overlap and the curves flow. There is like, they're going like, the curves are flowing like this, and then it keeps on flowing. So this is really curve to curve. And then it's just broken. there is just individual shapes. And also you can notice as well that none of the shapes are that nice even. They're really nasty and lumpy, which is also really important when it comes to making clean shapes. You have to make each shape really clean. Obviously, you know, one of the reasons is because I just quickly roughed it in and all that. But even like you can see this shape, it has like a plane change right here, and there's a plane change here, and a little plane change here, and a little there. You really want this to be nice and smooth all over. Look at the legs as well. They're very parallel. If we were to just look at this from the side view, compare this to this, you can see how parallel they actually are. The same thickness here, same thickness here as you have here. It's terrible. This is just a straight line as well. What we have, it is just a straight line from here to here, straight line from here to here, straight line from here to here. So it's just really nasty. If we were to look at the gesture of the character, the gesture is kind of like this, and then it goes down, and then it goes down, and then kind of it goes down, and then it goes down, and the arms go here, and then the arms go here, and the hands go down. Little bit of gesture on here, and a little bit of gesture here. Let's compare this to the good one. Just look at the overall gesture. There are very subtle differences. You know, they're very subtle, but they're really important. When we compare these, you can see that this flows like so, and it flows like so, and it flows like so. You can see how this curve just kind of takes over, and this flows in here, and this flows like so. This flows like there, and it kind of picks up like curve to curve, and then it also picks up like so. So these are things I'm very deliberately thinking about when it comes to it. Also, they're looking at the ear, how this kind of flows in like so. And we could have even had more flow. We could have been like this. We could have actually pushed the face in a bit more. But these are things which are not accidental. When you're doing these kind of sculpts, you're not just accidentally ending up with this. This is a kind of sculpt I would have done around 10 years ago before I knew about all this. And this, from a purely anatomical point of view, there isn't necessarily something wrong, but it's the gesture. It's the small little bits of appeal. Look at the face as well. If we were to look at this face, here you can see it's all flattened out. The shapes are nice and round, while in this case, the shapes are really nice and clean. Looking at the ear, in the good version, you can see that this flows very nicely like so. It flows nicely, and it has just a nice curve. And then when we compare this to the bad one, now it's like it goes very straight, and then it goes up, and then it's lumpy as crap on the back, and it's just not very nice. It just doesn't have any appeal. From the top view, it's even worse. So you can see it's almost like a drawn straight line, and then there's just a bunch of lumpy stuff. So this is the gesture. The gesture is duk and duk. So very nasty stuff. And then we look at this, and here you can see again, it's not that this is the perfect gesture. You know, this could definitely have been improved, but you can at least see that there is some thought put into it. So how can we fix this? That's one of the things we want to look at in actually this video. Let's make a new layer, and let's start to fix it. What you have to do in the beginning when you're doing something like this is you just need to make stuff even. You just have to go in and you just have to equalize areas. We have to go in to the pecs and just start to soften them out. We have to just make sure that we're balancing the different elements, because it's so unbalanced. We have to just make sure that stuff is just flowing into each other and that the volumes are yet again working. Now, obviously, you know, you wouldn't deliberately mess up your model like this, but this is something I've done so many times with student models, where it's not that they were messed up, but they were just like this in the beginning, where they're just missing the appeal phase. Everything is just there, and then I come in and I spend like 20 minutes on the model, and it just looks so much better afterwards. And not because there is some magic stuff happening, it's just because we've been tweaking very, very subtle volumes. Just a little bit here and a little bit there, and then suddenly you're looking at it and you're like, I don't know why this looks better, but it just feels better. And if you can't put that into words why it feels better, well, that's because you haven't seen the video in the last chapter where we're talking about it. Like, it's all these subtle little things. So already now we can start to see that it looks better. It just feels a lot stronger. And this is where it becomes really important that you don't overthink it when it comes to anatomy. You really, really shouldn't think about every single muscle. Shape is so much more important than correct anatomy. Like, if you were going for 100% correct anatomy, there's like 6 artists in the world who can actually fact check it. Now, it's important to have an understanding of it, of course. You know, you can't just completely invent something. But it's so much more important that you study how to make good shapes than it is studying exact anatomy for all the different things. You can always look up the exact origin and insertion, but if you don't have a good understanding of how to make shapes, then like nothing is going to matter. So now I'm just trying to balance all of this. And it doesn't matter if we remove details from it. Like, if we have to go in and we have to start adding some of the details back from the different heads of the deltoid, that's totally fine. It doesn't matter. We can always add details back to it. Like I said, it's so much more important that the shapes are reading. So I'm just trying to think of it as this one cohesive shape, and then we can start breaking it up. So now let's just review. We've actually removed detail and it looks better. Like, we've removed information from the sculpt and it looks better. And this is just a little annoying ZBrush bug. When this happens, we just have to go and disable the polypainting. And then we have to fix the gesture. I mean, this is something we could have done very early on as well instead of doing the chest, but it doesn't really matter. Now we can go and we can just fix the gesture. And by what I mean by fixing the gesture is just trying to think about one line going through the entire model. Maybe we can even start here so it starts flowing, and we can start putting this up a little so it just starts to flow already from the head. Then we need to add more curvature to the back. And then let's just soften this off a little bit. It's much, much better to have a good, simple model which has good gesture than it is to have a really, really detailed model which has no gesture. You can always add details back into it. It's kind of like if you're doing a building and you're not adding an elevator shaft from the beginning. It's just you're just struggling with that problem throughout. So now I'm just trying to think about the gesture. What can I do here to make sure that the gesture flows? So maybe we can make this curve a bit more like this. We can make this curve just pick it up a little bit. And of course, also we want this curve to flow into this curve as well. So just so it flows nicely. You really want to avoid these really straight lines when it comes to it. You really want to think about how does stuff flow. And also keep in mind you're doing a 3-dimensional sculpt. You're not just doing something in 2D. And let's just hide the arms as well a little bit, just so we can actually focus properly on this. So by doing a 3-dimensional sculpt, what I mean is that you actually need to work from all angles. Like in this case, I was working too much from the side view, which meant that it was actually really hard to see what was going on. So we just need to work with in 3 dimensions just so we can make sure that we have good volumes all around. Okay. Just trying to think about the overall gesture. So I'm trying to think if the shape flows down like so, then we need more of a gesture like here. Maybe we can also pick something up like so as well. And we need to make this thicker and give it more volume as well. This is also a really good example of what I was talking about in the last video when it comes to overlap. Now you can see these shapes are overlapping each other really beautifully, which just means that it just feels a lot better. It's just so much more appealing right away when you have overlapping shapes. It's like if you're doing any kind of drawing, like doing overlapping shapes like this will will just dramatically increase the appeal, but also when it comes to just pure sculpture. And I'm not concerned about the anatomy. Like, honestly, on most people, you can't even see individual muscles. Like, if you look at somebody's legs, like, obviously this is a creature, but even so, even if you look at somebody's legs, you can barely see muscles. You can see them when they're moving, but people are far too concerned with correct anatomy compared to good shape, like we talked about. So now you can see that this shape is very lumpy. It goes, the apex of the shape is here, instead of it being a nice, soft and round shape like so, where the apex is around here. So we're just gonna shift the apex. This is something you ideally shouldn't really fix. This is something which should just be there from the beginning. You shouldn't really move on to the next stage until you have this. So it's not that you do a crappy pass and then you fix it afterwards. No, you should always do this. And now this looks a bit weird because it's getting very thick and then it's getting very thin. So I'm just going to equalize this a little bit, just balance it off a little bit. And this is also a really awkward shape as well. This shape needs to be way more like this. We need to have like we can go make a straight, then we can make a nice curve. Really keep in mind straight to curve. I recommend doing exercises with the various components we talked about. One model, you're just trying to do as many straight to curves as you possibly can. And then you do curve to curve, and then you do all the things we talked about in the last video. Because this it just means you can focus on one thing at a time, and then it's going to come eventually. It's going to become more natural as you progress to the point where you're just kind of doing it without really thinking too much about it. It's a bit like learning a language where you focus on one part of the language at any one time, and you're just learning one word now, and then you learn some grammar, and then another word, and then after a little while, you're just doing it all without thinking about it. Okay, and then we need to blend the bicep as well, a lot, because this is really crappy. And then we also have to just make sure that we taper the arm. And when you taper it, you can also add some more curvature to it. And I will also make more of an overlap, where it actually overlaps the bicep a lot more, like so. Then we have to balance the triceps as well. Of course, you can have crazy big triceps on a model, that's totally fine, but it still has to feel natural. So I'm just going over the model and just balancing everything. This particularly is crazy big, so let's just soften this out a little. And notice again, I haven't used the smooth brush once. This is all clay buildup. The entire model so far is clay buildup. Then we have the abs, and this is where I have to just make sure that they feel like one cohesive shape instead of 8 individual packs. Most importantly, it's one cohesive shape. Unity with variation. You can always add individual variation back into it, but everything has to work together. It's one of these which is, it's weird to articulate why a design can feel awkward if you don't know about appeal. It's just one of these, it just doesn't feel right. And then you're looking at a master study by somebody who knows sculpting really well, far lower poly count and everything, and it just feels so much better. Even though technically they're very similar in terms of like, oh, maybe the anatomy is the same and all that, it just feels better. Okay, let's compare this to what we had to the other one. So we're definitely in a much better spot. Let's compare before and after, just so we can see. So now you can just see how there is actually some appeal being built. It's still not perfect. You know, we could take this a lot further. Like you see, we have a lot of lumps here. Actually, let's just fix this as well. You know, there's, okay, you know, there is a certain level where we got to fix it as well. So let's have some professional honor. So let's just fix this before we leave off this video. But like, you can just see that there is so much more appeal, and this is a fairly short session. Like just by fixing it. Let's make this a bit thicker like so, and then we can put this up like so. So this little fix which I'm doing now, this is not a 20-minute fix or however much it is. This is like a 3-year fix. This is, in order for me to go from this to this, that was like 3, maybe 5 years of pretty intense sculpting just to understand this. So if you can start to understand this for your own models just by starting to think about appeal as a separate thing, then you'll progress so much. The reason why it is also tricky to talk about appeal is because it's so easy to talk about this shape goes from here to here, and it's just a triangle between, and we have a bone spin below this, and we have skin on top of it and all that. The reason why this is tricky to talk about is because this is everything in between. This is how all these elements are composed together. But once you start to think about that, once you add appeal to your checklist, your models will become 1,000 times better. It is one of these that if you don't know the concept exists, how can you do it? And your models will just feel awkward. So let's just review this. Let's go through the chest. You can see how much nicer this is right away. Looking at the delts, we removed information. We took away information. Maybe the biggest thing for me is this the gesture here. Now it just flows so much nicer. So let's just have a look at this specific gesture, how awkward this feels, and how much nicer this feels just because we added the volume on the back. So we will of course talk more about appeal throughout this series, but this is like the main portion of it. I recommend that you keep these videos and you keep going back to them over the years. This is what I'm doing with my own notes for appeal, going back many years from when I was in university and such. I just keep revisiting them over the years because there's always something new you learn from going back to the deep fundamentals. Like I said, if you watch this video this year or in 10 years or 100 years, these concepts are still 100% valid. So just keep going back to them. A lot of the other chapters might not be valid because maybe there's a new magical brush or something like that. But understanding how different shapes interact with other shapes will dramatically improve your sculpting from now until infinity, essentially.